So you want to get into ketosis fast. That's what this video is about. How to expedite the process of getting into ketosis. The methods that I'm going to talk about in this video are things that I do myself and have been doing for the past few days. As a proof of concept, I will share my results at the end of this video as to how I have succeeded in getting into ketosis much faster than I otherwise would, using what I'm going to talk about today. Adapting to the ketogenic diet can be tough, and the first few days as you're kicking into gear can be the worst of that adaptation. So, speeding it up as quick as possible, even if it means suffering a little more for a shorter amount of time, can be a very useful tool. And that's precisely what we're doing here. Section 1. What is it that we're actually trying to do? In a brass tacks kind of way, what is it we're trying to do? We're trying to deplete our glycogen stores. The sugar that's naturally stored in our body will continue to fuel us and the energy needs of our body whilst it still exists. For ketosis to occur, we need to exhaust all of those supplies. So, where is sugar stored and how do we get rid of it? Your muscles store something in the ballpark of 300 to 500 grams of glycogen. Now, of course, the more muscles you have, the more sugar you're going to store. Of course, the sugar is in the form of glycogen. Your liver, on the other hand, stores about 100 to 120 grams of glycogen. The liver glycogen is far more important for our purposes than the muscle glycogen. A brief note about that. Glucose circulates your body and is taken into cells and is stored within those cells as glycogen. It undergoes a few chemical processes to be transformed into this form. Once the glucose is glycogen, that glycogen within your muscles, for our purposes, it's fair to say, cannot re-enter your bloodstream. So, put another way, the sugar that you store in your muscles will not contribute to your blood sugar. Should it drop, that sugar will not re-enter your bloodstream. However, that is not the case for the liver. In the case of the liver, the stored glycogen therein will re-enter the bloodstream should you have a deficiency of it. This is important, because that previously mentioned 100 to 120 grams of glycogen that's stored in your liver is the sugar that we're really concerned about. Because should you be low in blood sugar, your liver will release it. Until all of that sugar is gone from your liver, you will not enter into a state of ketosis, because the biological need to produce ketones will not be there. Section 2.5. How does it normally go? Well, if someone's doing the ketogenic diet, they're going to stop consuming that much carbs. And to meet those demands, their liver will slowly release the stored carbohydrates that it had. Eventually, it'll run out and you'll start producing ketones. That usually will take something in the ballpark of a week for most people. You can get that down a little quicker if you're used to getting into keto, etc. And with these methods, I think you can get it down to about 2 or 3 days. So a massive increase. So normally, you cut down on your carbs, you slowly deplete your stores, and you enter into ketosis. Given that knowledge, we can now attack the problem from 2 angles. Let's first talk about carbs in. If you want to deplete the stores of carbohydrates within your body, a good place to start is to consume radically less carbohydrates than you otherwise would, even on the diet. My recommendation for this process is, if you want to get into ketosis quickly, if you were going to consume 20 carbs a day, try consume 10, halve it. Go as little as possible. These few days might be a little worse than they otherwise would be, but go as low as you can. In fact, if you're comfortable with it, if it's something within your ballpark, try fasting. We're going to cut down massively on the amount of carbs that we're going to eat, and I think that one's pretty obvious. But what might not be obvious is the carbs out component. How do we increase the rate at which we're going to deplete our liver glycogen stores? Here's my recommendation. Increase your daily activity in these first days, whilst you're getting back into ketosis, quite a bit. For me, that means I will take 2 to 3, maybe 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer walks, a baseline increase in activity that is reasonably profound. Second, other than just walking a little more, we can also do dedicated exercise. There are 2 ways you can approach this when it comes to exercise. 1, aerobic exercise. This is cardiovascular work. We're talking going for runs, cycling, swimming, for quite a while. If you can manage to do an hour to an hour and a half of aerobic activity, you're going to kickstart this process enormously. In fact, you might even enter a state of ketosis a few hours after quite an exercise bout as that. That's not necessarily something that you or I can do. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be able to go for a run for an hour and a half. So, thinking a little more realistically, and something that I do quite often, is weight training. My recommendation is, on this day, and we'll go through the whole list in a bit, but my recommendation is to do some form of dedicated exercise that is reasonably strenuous. In my case, it's a lot of weight training, say for like an hour or so, or however much your schedule permits. Why are we doing this? This is part of the carbohydrates out component of the equation. If you were to go for this aforementioned high bar of 1.5 hours of aerobic activity, you would quickly deplete the blood sugar that you had. You would very quickly start depleting the stored glycogen within the muscles locally that are performing the activity, say your legs during a run. And thereafter, you would precipitously decrease all of the carbohydrates stored in your liver. Sometimes you'll hear the idea of runners hitting a wall when all of their blood sugar is gone. That's what we want. Now again, that's quite an ask. So let's talk about weight training for a second. In this example, we're not upping our energy demands to such an extent that the liver will use all of its stored glycogen. Instead, we're going to eat through the muscle glycogen that we have stored. Whilst this will not decrease our liver glycogen at the time, post-exercise, your liver will release some of its stored glycogen to replenish the stores that you have just depleted within your muscles. So during the exercise, it's not going to be doing the job that we want it to do. However, after the exercise, it will greatly help in our efforts. Oh, imagine I had a giant moustache that I could twirl. And this can be section 3, the protocol. My recommendation is the following. Wake up on the day that you're going to be doing this and try and not eat for as long as possible. During this fasted state, increase your activity. Go for a walk. Also, during this fasted state, do a workout, whether that be a longer aerobic activity session or a shorter, more intense weightlifting session. Both are fine. Both are good. Work out in a fasted state. Next, prolong your first meal for as long as possible whilst keeping your activity up. Then when you do eat, make sure it's significantly less carbohydrates than you are planning on consuming during your actual ketogenic diet. This day might be a little uncomfortable, but we're trying to expedite the process that otherwise would itself be rather uncomfortable. You've eaten your meal, and it's significantly lower in carbohydrates, preferably no carbohydrates, and if you can manage it, no food at all. Try eat only one meal. Then, on the next day, repeat the process, and, as far as my results are concerned, and what you might be able to expect, within that second day, you will likely have begun entering ketosis. Section 4, Adapting to Ketosis. I feel it's important to note here that adaptation to ketosis is a process that can take a little bit of time, and whilst you might be producing ketones to a reasonable degree, you might still not be feeling that good. And even doing this practice and getting into ketosis quickly, so as to say, producing ketones as quick as possible, it still might take a few days until you're fully keto adapted. But that's many days fewer than you otherwise would be. Normally, it might take a week to enter into a shallow state of ketosis, and further days beyond that to feel comfortable and good in that state. Doing this practice has gotten me down to about 2 days to enter ketosis, and a further single day thereafter to adapt fully to it and to feel good during ketosis. I need a tap water sponsorship.
Shit, okay, I'll get you camera. Wait!
I'm just gonna carry on going. Now that that nerd's gone, we can talk about cool stuff. Ah, yes. It's just as good as the last time. Maybe better. Section 5. My results. The day before yesterday, I deliberately broke my ketogenic diet in order to implement these tools, and to give you an example of what I have managed to do with respect to this strategy. I ate about 200 plus grams of carbs the day before yesterday. This came mostly in the form of rice. I intended to fully saturate my glycogen stores once again and kick me entirely out of ketosis. After that meal, and for the days after, I have been measuring my ketone levels through urine analysis, and I will share with you what I have learned. Immediately after my meal, to no one's surprise, my ketone levels were non-detectable. Beginning the protocol the following day, in the morning, whilst fasted, measuring my ketones, non-detectable. I measured again at around about 1 p.m, non-detectable. And then, at about 7 p.m, I measured again. Now, still in a fasted state. I have not had my first meal. I have done a number of small bouts of walking and a full exercise session. At about 7 p.m, my levels were trace. That is to say, it came out at about 0.5 millimoles per litre. That's good news. I then had my first meal, which I deliberately made very low in carbohydrates. After that meal, my levels were similarly low, just below trace. I went to bed. Next morning, I wake up, measure my levels. They're now a little higher. I got about 1 millimole per liter. That's a good sign. We're not quite in ketosis yet, but we're producing ketones. Presently, at about 5 p.m., yeah, that's right, I still have not had my first meal. I've been relatively active today, and have remained in a fasted state. My levels at present are 2 millimoles per liter, which means I have entered into a state of measurable ketosis. And it took me a day and a half. Section 6 or 5, whichever one. Expectations. I've been doing the ketogenic diet for a very long time. On and off for years. Long bouts, short bouts, and I've been experimenting with it for this entire time. I have found what works for me, and it likely will work for you as well. However, your results might not be the same. It might not take you a day and a half, it might take you 2, but that's a lot better than a week. And that's what we're trying to do here. Cut down what otherwise would be a prolonged and slightly uncomfortable experience down to the shortest manageable amount of time. A takeaway. I do not want what I have told you here to be used as an excuse to break the diet, because you now know that you can get back onto it more easily. That's not the takeaway. What I want the takeaway to be is, should you break your diet because of circumstances in your life? You went out for a lovely meal with friends, etc. Or you're taking a break because it's been a while. Whatever it might be. That this implementation, that these tools will help you get back into the swing of things as quick as possible with the least pain. This should embolden you to continue your diet should you ever break it. A quick point by point on the strategy. Eat as little carbs as possible, even more so than you would otherwise do on the ketogenic diet. Fast for as long as possible, even a full day if that's manageable and within your wheelhouse. Make sure to increase your activity, and if possible, make sure to increase your activity level, and if possible, do some workouts. If it's not within your wheelhouse, that's fine. Don't worry about it, but cut down on your carbohydrates dramatically and increase your activity level. Expect this to take 3 or so days for most people, 2 for some others, like myself, but overall, that's your general expectation. Use this to get back onto the diet should you ever fall off the wagon. Here's my notes, by the way.
Glucose is stored in the cells as glycogen, a large branched polymer made of glucose units. Muscle and liver can store glycogen, but they use it differently. Muscle glycogen is broken down and used locally for energy during activity. It cannot be used to raise blood glucose because muscle cells lack the enzyme needed to convert glucose 6-phosphate into glucose. In contrast, liver cells do have the enzyme glucose 6-phosphatase, which allows them to break down glycogen into glucose, convert it into free glucose by removing the phosphate group, and release it into the bloodstream to maintain blood sugar levels during fasting.
So I didn't put that in. That was just me talking about why muscles don't release glucose. Well, because when glucose enters muscles, it's stored as glycogen. But there's a couple of processes, intermediary steps and whatnot. But suffice it to say, it gets given a functional group of phosphate, basically. That's what we say it's phosphorylated. So imagine it like a stick, and you can pass it through a keyhole. And that stick can move freely between the keyhole. But then on the other side of the keyhole, some madman takes a phosphoryl group, which is it's a stick like this. He puts a stick like that. Now he can't pass it through the keyhole. But the idiot doesn't have anything necessary to break the stick apart. So it's just stuck. He can't get it out. Now it's in the muscle. Yeah. It cannot leave. It can only be burnt. That stick gets tossed in the fire, burnt up. Meanwhile, in the liver, sticks get passed through, phosphoryl group added, but then the liver can break the sticks apart and pass it back through the keyhole. But it's not relevant for them to know. By the way, whenever you hear A's, like amylase, phosphatase, it's an enzyme that breaks something down. Like salivary amylase is an enzyme you have in your mouth that actually starts breaking down carbohydrates.
It gives that vibe.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It breaks down starches into smaller form sugars. Yeah, anyway.